Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is James Parker and I am a professional landscape photographer living in Vancouver, Washington. This week's video is going to focus on circular polarizing filters and neutral density filters. What are they? What do they do? And when do you need to use them? So what are neutral density filters? Basically, the easy answer is that neutral density filters are like sunglasses for your camera. So circular polarizers and neutral densities all have one thing in common, and that is that they block a certain amount of light. The amount of light that gets blocked is based on the strength of the filter. So let's take a look at this chart. In the left-hand column, you'll see the standard nomenclature for the ND filters, the circular polarizer and UV filters at the top, and then there's ND4, 8, and so on. In the center column, that is the number of stops of light that are being blocked, the f-stop reduction. And it goes from 0 all the way to 16 2/3. The last column on the right is showing the percent of light transmitted through that filter. For a UV filter, it's 99.9% of all the light that's out there comes through because it doesn't really do anything. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, we've got 0.001% of light gets through. It's basically a solid black piece of glass. Now you might be wondering why they didn't just name the ND filters based on the number of stops of light that they block, which is my thought. I think that's makes the most sense. But what they did was they used the numbers to denote how much light was being transmitted. And 2 is 50%, and then everything else is half of that. So it goes 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, etc. on the NDs, and then every time you half that half the amount of the light transmission. So it goes from with the ND2 is 50%, ND4 is 25%, and then it's 12.5%, then 6.25% of light transmitted, all the way to when you get to ND1000, and it's only transmitting 0.1% of the light. Before I show you some photographs that I took with the different filters, let's just take a look at the ones that I use primarily. We'll look at a circular polarizer, an ND8, and an ND1000. Notice when I move the circular polarizer around the screen, it gets just a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more saturated. And the big reason to use a circular polarizer is just to cut down a little bit of light, extend that shutter speed just a little bit, and remove those reflections. Next up is the ND8. Notice immediately how much darker it is. Now I overexposed the camera just a little bit so that you could actually see the effect a little bit better. But it's much, much darker. The trees are almost black, but look how much detail it pulls back out of that blown out sky just by using that ND8. Last, we'll look at the ND1000, 10 stops of light stopping power. And you can look, it's just solid black on the camera, and it creates some really, really long shutter speeds. Now that we understand what ND filters do and how they're named, let's talk about when you would use them. ND filters are used to create a longer shutter speed, to force that shutter to stay open a longer period of time. An example of this is you're shooting a waterfall and it's maybe a bright day, maybe not a sunny day, but a brighter day, and you want to drag that shutter, meaning you want to leave the shutter open a longer period of time. If you've already stopped down your aperture, you've closed your aperture as much as you can. Let's say you went all the way to f22. You've lowered your ISO all the way down to ISO 50 if your camera even goes that low. And you still have a shutter speed that is way too short to get the artistic vision that you want for your photograph. That's where ND filters come into play. So to finish off this week's video, let's take a look at some images that I took out on the Oregon coast of the Tillamook Lighthouse. The first image that we'll look at will have no filters, then we'll see what it looks like with a circular polarizer, then with the ND8, and then finally with the ND1000. So this first photograph is with no filter, proper exposure. Proper exposure on this is an 1/80th of a second for all the images, f/16 ISO 100. And as we zoom in and look around, you can see that there's still a lot of texture in the water. The waves in the background are well defined. Even the sea lions that are laying up there are nice and sharp as well. But what if I wanted to create a smoother look of the water? Let's put a CPL on and take a look at that image. Most CPLs don't do a lot of light stopping power. It's usually a stop, stop and a third, somewhere around in there for most. And so this went from an 1/80th to a 1/40th of a second. And if we zoom in, it's not a lot of difference between the previous photograph. It's a little bit of blur, where the waves are crashing on the rock, but the waves are still well defined all the way around the lighthouse. So let's see what happens when we really up the game and we put an ND8 on. So the ND8 takes us all the way to a 1/10th of a second. And that's 3 stops of light. And again, we'll zoom in and we'll take a look. And we're seeing a little bit blurrier where the waves are crashing. The waves though, they look a little soft, I should say. The waves and everything aren't as crisp. There are some blur effects on the tops of the waves with the ND8. Still not the look that I would really want. So we're gonna put on the ND1000, 10 stops of light are gonna be stopped. Now this is the look that I was going for. ND1000, 10 stops of light. That shutter gets dragged all the way to 15 seconds. I love this look. I love the fact that it isolates that lighthouse and it smooths out that ocean so nicely. As we'll look around the edges, it almost looks like it's a layer of fog around the lighthouse from the waves that crash onto it, and then that long shutter speed just kind of smooths it all out and smooths it all together. The waves are pretty much just a nice smooth texture with just a little bit of white, almost looks like clouds in the background. And so that is a look that 10 stop is going to give you when you're out shooting at the ocean, or if you're possibly shooting clouds that are moving across the sky and at a pretty good clip. So that's going to be it for this week's video. Appreciate you watching. I hope you liked it. I hope you got something out of it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. That really helps me out. Also, if you have any questions about ND filters, circular polarizers, what I use, leave me a comment below. I'll read and answer every single one. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.